Welcome in to another episode of Odd Man Rush. Hope you're all having a great week. I'm Will Highland, joined by Kyle Diezel, Boston's most eligible bachelor. Happy to have him joining us tonight, as always, to talk some hockey. I realize it's been quite a long time since we did a hockey-specific podcast, but between the NFL playoffs, the holidays, and everything in between, we are just now getting around to the January episode, but better late than never. Kyle, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. It's been a interesting day, I'll tell you that. I watched some guy get their car stuck in the mud. So it's been a fun time. So and then yeah, we'll just call it a fun time.
Yeah, and speaking of hockey and the weather, and cars, I mean the roads were so bad this morning in Maine that you could have probably played hockey in the street without rollerblades, but with ice skates instead. That's how icy the roads were. We had about an inch and a half of rain, which translated to about a tenth to a quarter of an inch of ice, depending on where you were. So yeah, it was a lot of fun commuting this morning, I'd say. But pleasantries aside, Kyle, there's been a lot of water under the bridge, literally and figuratively, since we last spoke, in the with regard to the NHL specifically. Has there been anything in the last month that's really stood out to you? I got something in mind, but I want to tease first before we get to our power rankings. Is there a big story that you've seen?
Yeah, I think there's a few big stories. Let's start with Edmonton making their way back up kind of in the power rankings, but also let's talk about how I believe both of our MVP players are not going to win. I think it's going to be Nathan McKinnon. The
Yeah.
Avalanche. He is literally probably the star, the stud this year. Watching him overall. So, and the sad thing is that the Avalanche aren't even number one right now in their division. So,
Yeah,
uh,
but it does you don't have to be number one in your division to make
no, you
this
don't
Stanley
have
Cup.
to. But I have the best player in the league currently. I would say they have
And I
number one.
think they have the best defenseman in the league. I think he
Oh, true.
just he just set the Avalanche franchise record for most goals by a defenseman already. Cale Makar did the other day. So
Correct.
like I don't know. I'm still very, very bullish on the Colorado Avalanche. And obviously Nathan McKinnon has a lot to do with it. They were my Western Conference champion pick.
Yep.
And I think Georgiev, their goalie, is playing better than Darcy Kemper did when they won the first time a couple of years ago. And so at this point, I wouldn't put it past Colorado to go on a big run. But we'll talk about them more in a second. I agree with Edmonton. I
Edmonton's
and
coming
I,
up.
I agree that even with their rise, I don't know if they'd be able to give the heart to Connor McDavid even if they wanted to this year.
No,
Um,
unfortunately, just based on overall stats that McKinnon is performing with or providing for the Avalanche, it just doesn't
yeah,
make.
it's hard. And look, Matthews is a great candidate. So is Matt Tkachuk. There's a few others in the league that you could make an argument for. Pasternak,
Yeah,
personally.
you made your case for that, but I think right now, just looking
Yeah,
at it, I
yeah.
think.
It's certainly McKinnon is the clubhouse leader at this moment in time.
But going off of other teams, that's just for the West side. For the East side, the Bruins are definitely stepping up. It looks like the Rangers have taken a little bit of a step back with a few key losses here. But I think the Florida Panthers are starting to turn it up a bit here in the East. Besides that, I think Florida right now is the team to potentially to watch out for in the East right now.
Right, and I mean, Carolina was my East pick, right? And they just beat the Bruins. The Bruins had only lost one game in regulation all of 2024 so far,
Correct.
and actually since Christmas. But they lost their second last night to Carolina, and I think Carolina dealing with some health problems. But
Yeah.
when they get healthy again, they're going to be good again. They're a second half team. They
Mm-hmm.
always have been. Um, and so in the East, that's who I see ascending. But just heading back to the West so far, what I was going to bring up as my big story is how bad the Kings are. I believe the Kings lost 12 out of 15.
The
Uh,
Kings, are the
but they
last 10.
like have
They're on a
bottomed
skid.
out.
They are 2-5-3 in the last 10.
So 2-5-3. So that means yeah, so they've lost 8 out of 10, right? If you factor in overtime losses. And that was a team that played Edmonton in the playoffs a few years in a row there. And people had high hopes for them because they have a young team, but it's really their older guys that stepped out. I don't know if you had a chance to see Drew Doughty's comments, but I mean, Drew Doughty's a two-time Stanley Cup winner and a gold medalist, and he's talking about his team not really competing hard or or being team oriented.
You want
Uh,
to know what the sad part is, though? They're still in playoff contentions, even though they've had this bad
right,
of a.
because the Pacific is kind of bad outside of Vancouver and Vegas, to be honest. I mean, the the Flames are hanging around and the Oilers are ascending and the Kraken are hanging around because of their goaltender and the Kings are also in the mix. So yeah, but they have completely like fallen from what I thought they would be this year. I thought they'd be a much better team. But perhaps Vancouver is the story. Vancouver and Winnipeg, those two Western Canadian teams. We talked about Edmonton. They're the bee's knees right now. If you're talking about the West, it's
Correct.
Vancouver and it's Winnipeg.
Yeah, I mean, your top basically, there's a huge difference between your top three teams versus everyone else in the Western Conference overall. Unless Kings can turn around, it's literally six teams versus the rest. There's not even a comparison.
Yeah,
I'm looking at
it's
like
wild.
like record wise, like how successful at home and away they've been. Pretty much the same.
And a lot of it has to do with Demko. A lot of it has to do with Demko and how good he has been, and Elias Peterson. Now he's the guy I didn't even mention in the heart, but
Mm-hmm.
he's in the conversation. So
Yeah,
anyway, that's sort of the big look at the whole league. Do you want to jump into power rankings?
yeah. You want to start with? We start with the West last time. Do you want to start with the East?
Yeah, let's start with the East.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the West so far.
All
I'll
right.
let you go first.
Okay. So this is what I have for my top five currently. In
Yep.
number five. So number five, I'm starting. Excuse me. Currently, I'm starting with the Toronto Maple Leafs as my number five. Offensively, they're still a powerhouse all the way around. Matthews can never count them out. Um, Overall, I think they're just not quite there yet, especially goaltending wise. Definitely looking good, but I don't think they compare to at least the top three teams right now above them. They can definitely compete with the fourth team, uh, which I would say right now is the Hurricanes, which currently is my number four. Number three is a surprise. I do have the Rangers at number three. I think the last few losses they have really hurt them. They haven't looked too good. Shesterkin does not look like himself from last year. Quick has looked a lot better, like we've emphasized before. And then Florida has just looked phenomenal these last few weeks. I have them at number two, and then of course I have the Bruins currently at number one. They've just looked solid all the way around. So that's currently my power rankings. How does yours compare to mine right now?
So it's funny because in our last football podcast with Cam, I talked about how I wouldn't be getting any Christmas cards from folks in Philadelphia. Uh, but that said, it's
Your handsome,
really
handsome out.
I'm gonna hand out, excuse me, I'm gonna hand out some praise to the boys in the city of brotherly love, and I'm putting the Philadelphia Flyers at 5. Uh, they've
Not
turned it
bad.
on. They've played well. I'm looking at the most recent cover of the Hockey News. As you all know, I'm a subscriber. This is a free plug for them, not a sponsor. And they have their front office on the front. And Keith Jones, for most of my life, he's been an announcer. He's made all the difference there. I think the leadership really starts at the top. Then you have Danny Briere. I mean, played for the Flyers. I believe he played for Montreal too.
Yeah.
He was the GM of the minor league team here in Maine for a while. Um, and it's really top down from there. I think for me the Panthers have just excuse me, the Flyers have just played so well these last few weeks to get themselves into a playoff position. And, a lot of that has to do with John Tortorella in year two, I believe. Finally, or actually maybe it's year three, I can't remember. But John Tortorella finally like getting a good grip on that dressing room, and having buy-in. And that's why they're five to me. And so ironically, probably the second city in America where I'd never get a Christmas card from would be Toronto. And so I'm leaving them out of the top five, and therefore at four, I'm going to
Okay.
go with the New York Rangers at four. They've fallen off a little bit. Shesterkin worries me. They're a very top heavy team. I don't know if a 36-year-old Blake Wheeler, or however old he is at this point, is really who I want to be relying on a lot with these big minutes. Um, I like Truba, but he was banged up recently. So there's some things I'm worried about with the Rangers, and I've learned not to get too jazzed up about the New York Rangers because in the past, I've gotten bullish on them and it hasn't paid off.
Mhm.
At three, I'm going with Carolina. They beat Boston last night. Boston has only lost 5 games by more than one goal. We'll talk more about them in a second. But uh, last night's game was a gutsy win over the Bruins on the road. Um, that's something that Carolina is going to need more of as they get further on in the season. And then at two, I have the Florida Panthers. Like you said, I think they're the most dangerous team in the Eastern Conference right now. Um, if you look at some of these other teams, like Toronto, like Carolina, like Detroit, they don't have a lot of regulation wins. The Leafs only have 15 regulation wins. They have 9 overtime wins. Now, that's great, but in the playoffs, you're not playing 3-on-3 or shootout. So
Correct.
so with two, and trust me, the Florida Panthers are good in overtime. So I am a little. That would be the team that would scare me the most. Believe they have 25 regulation wins. They're taking care of business and they're doing it in all phases of the sport. And then I do have the Bruins at one. Like I said, they've only lost 5 games all season by more than one goal. Um, and I believe the difference between them and Florida right now is 5 points, and those 5 points are because the Bruins have lost 5 games in overtime. And so that's a
That's different.
significant factor in those 5 points are the difference because they have the same amount of wins. It's just Florida's lost 5 more games in regulation. The Bruins 5 games have been in overtime. So they've played the same amount of games and they've won the same amount of games, but that's the difference. Now, ironically, in the playoffs, it doesn't matter, right? Like I was just said, you if you can win the game in overtime, you win the game in overtime. So in the Bruins, if you lose in overtime, you lose in overtime, and it counts the same in the playoffs. A loss is a loss, whether it happens in 5 periods or 3 periods. So anyway, I know that's sort of with a lens of the playoffs, but that's how I look at the East right now. The Bruins are still the class of the East. They've
Yep.
been the most consistent team. But the thing that worries me about the Bruins is they're they give up a lot of odd man rushes. That's something I've said for a long time. That is the byproduct of playing in the Montgomery system. But I think long term they should be able to edge it out, and we'll see. What about your Western Conference?
My West might be a little surprising. Number five, I currently have Edmonton. They're on a 14 game winning streak, which
They're
is
insane.
that's insane. Um, so I'm sorry, Dallas, you're not making top five this week or this month currently. At number four might be a little shocking. I do have the Vegas Knights at number four. They've been pretty solid all year round. Can never count them out. Just the current way they're playing has not been too impressive to me overall.
Yeah.
Um, Three Vancouver, same thing. They just fallen off. They put the gas. They've haven't put the gas pedal to the metal like they did earlier in the season. So basically, all my Pacific leaders are currently my 5, 4, and 3. At number two, I'm sorry to say it. I think it is Colorado. They have definitely gone up in the rankings. Huge. Um, like we talked about earlier, they have probably the best offensive player this year and probably the best defensive player of the year. Um, and then, of course, Winnipeg at number one, currently in the West, should always be number one right now just because of how they're playing overall. Maybe people didn't expect them to perform too well. We both didn't think they'd be excelling this well midway through the season. So congrats to them, I have to say right now.
So I'm a little bit different from you, but I agree. Winnipeg's been a great story. And I'm just looking over the goal differential here because I had it jotted down in my notes.
Yeah.
So the goal differential is really what I'm looking at here. And I know that's sort of an elementary way of looking at power rankings, but honestly, like if you're if you're not allowing a lot of goals in and you're scoring a lot, that means you're winning a lot of games. That means you're a good hockey team. It's pretty simple. Like you, it's hard to ignore the Edmonton Oilers, so they have to be in the mix. But I'm sliding them ahead of Vegas at this point. I'm putting Vegas in at 5. I love Bruce Cassidy, but Jack Eichel's been hurt, right?
Yeah.
That has a
Yeah.
lot to do with it. Uh, and then at 4, I'm going yeah, at 4, I'm going to Edmonton. They've won 14 in a row. I mean, it's insane. And they're playing great in all phases. In that power play, it's lethal. And they just added Corey Perry. Think what you want about Corey Perry and whatever, but I'm just going to put it in there that this guy's a former Rocket Richard Trophy winner, MVP candidate. Stanley Cup winner. I mean, the dude plays. He's won gold medals. I mean, he's not going to hurt that team. So they're at 4. At three, I've got Colorado. It sucks leaving Dallas out of this because I think Dallas is still a really damn good hockey team, but they'd be my 6. So at three, I got Colorado out of that Central Division. Like we mentioned already, they're getting really good goaltender play. But they're three-headed monster up front on defense and in net with McKinnon, Makar, and Georgiev is, I mean, the best 3 that you can think of. I mean, maybe you could make an argument for Hellebuck and yeah, and Scheifele or whatever, but he hasn't been playing a lot. But anyway, I'm getting off track here. You might be able to make a case with my number 1 team though, which I'll get to in a moment.
Yeah.
Number 2, I've got Winnipeg. We've talked about that. I just mentioned Scheifele, Hellebuck, Kyle Connors. That whole team is just firing. And then number 1, this is where you make the other argument and where I go back to goal differential. Thatcher Demko, Elias Peterson, Quinn Hughes, boom, boom, boom. You know what I mean? The 3 best players on that team, just like Colorado, representing those 3 categories. And their goal differential, Kyle, the Canucks are plus 58. It's pretty hard to me to overlook that when the next closest team in the entire league is Winnipeg at plus 41. You know what I mean? Like, if you told me at the beginning of the year that they would have a plus 58 goal differential, I would have thought you were nuts. But here we are, and the Canucks look like the best team in the West. And if you're a Bruins fan and you're looking ahead at dreaming about a possible Stanley Cup scenario, which I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, of course. But if I'm looking ahead, I'm thinking Canucks, Bruins in the Stanley Cup rematch from 12 years ago or 13 years ago. That would be ecstasy. Uh, it would be amazing. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. You know who, if I was at any team in the East, you know who I wouldn't want to play though? The Winnipeg Jets. I watched the game the other night. They grind you down. Hellebuck stops whatever. They grind you down. They're good. They're stymied. They remind me of like the St. Louis Blues a few years ago when they beat us. They remind me of all these cup winners from recent past, like those Penguins teams or those Kings teams. They're dangerous. So anyway, the West is kind of fun. I'd love to see somebody else like Seattle or Calgary or um or LA get better and push. Um, Maybe Dallas will laugh at us all when Ottinger goes on a really insane run, but that's sort of where I am at right now. But it, to me, it's going to come down to matchups and goaltending and 5-on-5. And if you're able to succeed in two out of those three areas on any given night, um, that's where teams are going to really make their money. Um, did you have any other thoughts on the power rankings? Who's the worst team in the league? Is there anybody? Is it San Jose versus the Field or what?
No, I mean, you think if you look at overall points and wins, it's also got to be Chicago. I mean, they're out Connor Bedard right now.
Right.
Um, I mean, like we talked about, I think the biggest shock so far right now. I mean, we talked about them not being well would be the Senators in the East.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
also
they're playing the
Buffalo.
Bruins tonight.
Yeah, I mean, also yeah, just basically Ottawa, really Ottawa in the East, and then to battle. I thought the Ducks would be better. I think they have a solid goaltender. I don't know what's going on, but I'm also surprised a little bit how the Wild aren't quite up there as I
Yeah,
thought
the
they would be.
Wild blow.
Um,
What is
hey,
with that?
I don't know what's
Because
going
they've
on.
been good for a while. Like they've never really been good in the playoffs, but they're like
No,
always like regular season good. You know what I mean? Like they'll always hang around, and they got good players. Joel
no,
Eriksson Ek and Kirill Kaprizov are good players. I Those are like their two best players. I'm really confused about them.
yeah, I mean, just looking at like the standings overall, it's still pretty tight, which is awesome to see. Close competition, points all the way
Yeah.
around. But like Nashville's in right now as the second wild card team. I mean, I had them making the playoffs, early predictions.
Right.
So
Yeah, I
uh,
liked like we said over the summer, I liked what Nashville did in the offseason. So yeah, they're gonna hang around and look like I hate to be like the guy, like banging this drum,
mhm.
because like it's sort of what I'm dying on this hill, but I'm gonna look. I still think that Calgary has too good of a roster to not make the playoffs one of these years. Like, look, like the Kachuk and Gaudreau thing sucked. They're playing Columbus tonight at the Dome in Calgary, so is that thing with Gaudreau might happen. They're always gonna, or maybe that was last night they played. I thought they were playing. Yeah, no, they are playing the Blue Jackets tonight. But I hate to keep banging this drum, but I'm gonna look at their schedule here. Like they've got Columbus tonight, they blow. They've got Chicago on Saturday, they blow. They've got Minnesota. We just talked about them. They suck. You know what I mean? So that's like three winnable games for Calgary right now, right? Like, and then you get Nashville and Philly, and then you get Chicago and Ottawa and Arizona. Like they have some winnable games up here and they are too good of a team to and they have a new coach and a new GM. It's like at some point they have to go on a heater here, no pun intended, and like make a run at it again. That's what's confusing because you saw Winnipeg last year. They were sort of on the bubble. They had a really good roster. Um, and then, what really clicked for them is they locked up their guys, right? And Calgary already locked up their guys, but for some reason they can't get out of their own way with this roster. And it's wild.
no, it is. It's nuts. But hey, this is why we play the sports. You
Yeah.
can have all the talent and still stink.
Yeah. It's so confusing. Like it's same thing with Minnesota. But anyway, like Calgary's sort of sitting on the bubble, but they've got like 6 out of the next 8 games are against teams that I think they're better than on paper. So go for it. Anyway,
Hey,
that's just a quick, like, selfish tangent here because I have a soft spot for them. Um, anyway, speaking of like tangents and goaltending and whatnot, I I'm sure you've seen who the New York Islanders have hired as their new head coach. Um, in fact, when we did the greatest of all time athlete draft a year and a half ago with Cam, you picked Patrick Waugh as your goat of hockey. Well, he's been hired by the New York Islanders, and the New York Islanders are playing Montreal tonight. So it's just interesting how that works, how that works out. I believe, he was the coach of the Quebec Ramparts in the Q, and was elevated quickly to be the head coach in New York. And look, Bo Horvat's been playing pretty well this year. Lou Lamoriello likes his guys. But what's your take on Patrick Waugh in New York?
it's interesting. I really don't know. Like you said, he came up really fast, so I'm just kind of a little bit shocked by it all. I think it's cool overall. You're bringing in one of the greatest goaltenders and players of all time, big name. But I'm just questioning it a little bit, just because the Islanders also aren't a very young team. As just like, not saying they're trying to rebuild, but like, is he going to be the future coach to help rebuild this team later
Right.
on? It's just like he's here now to give them like a veteran presence who has won and win now. And so
Yeah,
I kind of can't tell what the Islanders are trying to do.
you
Well,
never know what they're doing.
they're not bad. They're still in playoff contention, but like I don't know what they're trying to what the focus is right now.
Yeah, they're confusing because, like, Waugh is a coach who had coached in juniors, right? Like,
Yeah,
I would think he would excel with a younger team. But like, the Islanders are sort of a veteran team.
correct.
And I don't know, like, it seems like we're in a little bit of a honeymoon phase. Like, I'm sure from Semyon Varlamov, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I get to be coached by who? The same thing if I'm Sorokin. I get to be coached by one of the best ever do it. It'd be like Marty Brodeur coaching you as a goalie, or Dominic Hasek coaching you as a goalie. Uh, same idea. So that's wild to me. That's happening. So and that news broke earlier last week. Um, and it made tonight's game in Montreal sort of must see TV. I'll probably want to tune into it in a little bit when we're done recording. See what the score is and whatnot. But anyway, I wanted to bring that up because it's one of those interesting things that, like, this sport just sort of pulls storylines. The
Correct.
storylines in the NHL write themselves. I mean, they really do. Like, you couldn't have planned that if you tried.
Speaking of breaking headlines, how about Corey Perry here signing with Edmonton, but also him going to Edmonton? Does this win streak of theirs, 14 to 13 games, does that have to do anything with him, you think? Any of their success currently? Or
Well,
do
he
you think it's
just joined the team, so I wouldn't say I would say it's more the other way around. I'm saying they're adding him because, and like I said earlier, they're already a really good team, but
yeah,
Corey Perry,
he has won. He knows how to
yeah,
win.
like, he's won cups, he's won gold medals. Like, that team still doesn't know how to win.
Correct.
And if I'm Evander Kane or Leon or RNH or Connor McDavid, I'm happy to have that guy in the locker room. Uh, but to me, it's like, okay, you added a veteran presence. He's not, apparently, according to people I heard. I think was it Anson Carter or Henrik Lundqvist or somebody on the TNT panel last night said that Corey Perry is just gonna, sort of mind his own business. He's not gonna hurt the chemistry in Edmonton. So I don't think their winning streak is in danger. The other thing is, last few places he's been, he's sort of like left in a ball of fire.
Yeah,
Like, I'm not going to entertain the rumors that were percolating in Chicago about what he was doing, but it is a factor. You know, they brought him in for the same reason. So we'll see. I'd like to see other teams take swings at this kind of stuff. Like we saw Pat Kane go to Detroit. I think if I'm Chicago, I'm selling off anybody else who might be hanging around. Like I would, if I'm the Bruins, I try and swing a trade for Ryan Donato or hell Nick Foligno or somebody like that. Like I think the Bruins could use another forward. And clearly Edmonton thought that too, despite their success, and that's why they went out and grabbed Corey Perry, who was just sort of hanging out. But yeah, to answer your question, I am I'm not surprised. I don't think it has anything to do with their current success in that he's gonna help prolong it. I just think maybe the success is the reason why they felt compelled to add because now they're in the mix. Then they're fully in the mix. Before it was
Yeah,
sort of like, yikes, they had fired their coach and all these things had happened. Now we're looking at an Edmonton team that is as dangerous as they've been in the past few years.
agreed.
Yeah. So it'll be exciting to watch, and there's plenty of hockey still left to be played. Um, But I think one thing I wanted to talk about with you before we ended the show tonight was the PWHL and its rebirth since we last recorded. Uh, we said and we pledged over the summer when this news broke that we would pick a team to support. So, without further hesitation, who are you supporting in the PWHL?
Oh, that's tough. I don't know. It's just tough. I kind of support two teams right now. I'm kind of my heart is with New York, but I also Ottawa. Those are the teams I'm currently falling for. The only sad part is with the women's current NHL, is that I'm not too happy that the Boston team is not playing in Boston. They're playing over in Lowell, which is very disappointing. Um, they should be playing in Boston, but unfortunately they're not. I don't know
They're
if it.
playing at the Songa Center, right, in Lowell.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
I wish they were in Boston. It'd be so much. I think it'd be better. It'd be awesome. I'm not sure if it's space they can't get or what it is,
Here's
but
here's my devil's advocate. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
About on that point, it materialized so late
Big,
that like the Celtics and the Bruins kind of take over TD Garden, plus concerts, plus everything else, plus the Bean Pot, plus Hockey East, plus all that.
correct.
If you're gonna play at an arena in Massachusetts, I would rather they go to a big one like Lowell where they can be standalone than
True.
play at Aganis or Connie Forum or Warrior in Boston and sort of be like B-rate. Because our buddy Ian Burgess could talk about it more. I think that's a great barn up there in Lowell. I do. So playing devil's advocate on that, New Jersey
Yeah,
devil's advocate, I will say, pun intended. I am a little more excusatory of that because they get their own space. So you're going with New York and Ottawa. Interesting. I'm going with Boston, and it's not just because I'm a Boston honk. Hillary
Jesus.
Knight, in my opinion, is the best American women's hockey player.
I'm not disagreeing with that, but
And
that's the underdog. Underdog's the way to go, I'd say.
and I agree to an extent. Hillary Knight, the pride of Sun Valley, Idaho. I had to look up her hometown because I was like, I thought she'd be from Minnesota or New York or something. I did not
No,
have Idaho on my list, but they have some local people too. They have Sammy Davis forward. Um, she's like pretty young too, so she's going to be around a while from Pembroke, Mass. And they have a a defense woman, I will say, from Burnaby, BC, which is the birthplace of my dad. Um, so just looking deep on the roster here, I'm not just being biased to Boston. I think that we've got a nice little squad here, and in fact, without getting too political, um, they have another thing going for them, which is the other night they were playing in Ottawa against Ottawa, and and uh, Prime Minister Trudeau was there, and he was saying something about how he really wanted them to beat Boston. All right, well then that's all the fire I need there as my tertiary reason. So number one, Boston. Number two, Hillary Knight / the rest of the roster. Number three, Justin Trudeau doesn't like them. All right, great. Sounds like my team. So I'm staying Boston. And look, their uniforms, personally, I think I'm looking at the jerseys for the whole squad. I wish they were black and gold like the Pride used to be, but I get why they didn't do it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't love the green. I wish they kind of went with more of like a Dartmouth green than like a Green Bay Packers green, but it's fine. Um, I think the best jersey is Ottawa.
Yeah.
Montreal also has a pretty dope jersey. New York's I'm not a fan of, and I don't really like Toronto's either. I
Hey,
don't
at
know if
least
you have a chance to look at the uniforms. Have you had a chance to look at the jerseys?
oh, no, I have not had a full chance to look at the jerseys, but I have had a chance to look at the current new rules they're trying to implement.
Oh, what
And
a segue. What a pro. Hit me.
all right, so first one is how first I got to start with I love how right now they're allowing the women to actually start the hip check and hit people. Oh, I'm loving it. I'm
Did you
loving it.
see Marie? Speaking of, did you see Marie Poulin's or Marie Philip Poulin's
Oh,
hip check? She just
yeah.
like laid them out. She's just like, see ya.
Sign me up. I'm gonna start ordering season tickets right now. We're gonna start going to the law, watch the games all the time. No, I'm serious. I would definitely totally invest into it if this is how it's gonna be for the future. I think it's like super bright for women's hockey to go forward to allow this. Going off of that, the rules. How do you feel about them implementing the shorthanded goal? And if you score, you get to bring your player out of the box. I
I
think
always thought that made sense. Like I remember when I first started watching hockey, it was like if you score a power play goal, the other team gets to send their person out. But then if you score a shorthanded goal, your guy stays in. That was weird. I never understood that dichotomy. So, look, I get it. It's fairness, but there's already the other people would say that there's already an incentive for you when you're shorthanded, which means you can ice um without penalty, without having to come back to your zone. Like you can freely ice the puck whenever you want when you're shorthanded. Like I
correct.
get that, but I think what it does is it um it incentivizes offensive play, and it actually incent by the defense, and it also incentivizes the team that's on the advantage to not overcommit to score, knowing that if they give up a break going the other way, that they could lose their power play opportunity. So I like it. I do. There are some weird things that I'm not quite sure about. Like for example, if it's a delayed penalty, can your goalie still leave without like because if it's a delayed penalty, then the next person to touch obviously is it's a whistle and the power play begins. Is that still true?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
If it's delayed, yes, until the other team touches the puck. As long as you don't pull a Pittsburgh Penguin and score that, um, it's still good. Still legal. Yes.
Yeah. Touche. All right. What other rules we got?
The other one, oh gosh, I just slipped my mind what it was. I
The
didn't
point
know.
system, right?
Yes, the point system. So regulation win is 3 points. As normal, expected. Overtime win is two, and then overtime loss is one. How do you feel about that kind of point system versus what we currently have in the NHL? More of like a soccer style versus
Yeah. So I got in the Premier League a little while ago. I think maybe like 4 or 5 years ago,
yeah,
and I watched soccer primarily English soccer now, and or as they would call it, football. Um, and that's actually one thing that I've appreciated the most about the league and watch in that sport. So I'm glad that the PWHL is adopting it for ice hockey, partially because that's how a lot of international tournaments work. If they do a round robin, in hockey, I believe that's how the IIHF likes to do it. Um, if I'm not mistaken. And I think if it it would eliminate a couple things. I think the first thing it would eliminate is full out tanking, because if you don't get as many points for an OT loss, like you know what I mean, um like for example, you would get 3 for a win, 1 for a OT loss, and 0 for a normal loss.
Yeah.
And then if you had a OT win, it would still be 3.
Yes.
Okay. So if you're a team that sucks and you're tanking, but you get to overtime, like, you know, maybe it actually wouldn't eliminate. I was thinking maybe it would eliminate tanking, but actually it might make it worse because now you can't. Yeah. I was trying to think through that. That
Yeah.
was my
No.
gut reaction. The second thing I think is more valid. So maybe it won't do anything with tanking. Now, obviously, when there's 6 teams in the league like there is in the PWHL, you're not going to tank anyway.
Yeah.
But um, maybe it would eliminate, to that note, uh, too many like tiebreakers. Maybe it would like somehow make the standings less close and break them up a little bit. But the thing
Right.
I was really going for is it incentivizes you to actually like win the game in overtime, because like the Bruins have lost a lot of overtime games this year, and I'm thinking, oh, I wake up the next day and I'm like, oh, that's okay. We still got a point, and they only got 2. They're only 1 point better than us. The team that just beat us. Like if we lost to Toronto or Florida or somebody in overtime, it'd be like, well, it's really only a point difference. Now that point might matter later on in the year, but
Yeah.
it's easier to make up. Now, if that was suddenly a 2 point difference, like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're now 2 points ahead of us
Yeah.
based on
No.
that
I
game.
I think it just makes it more like you talked about. Like I think it just makes the exposition game itself more important. Like it values more of actually winning a game in regulation versus we'll just go to overtime for a comeback. Well, if you're playing an in division team, you may not want to go to overtime. Like if it's Toronto versus the Bruins, you probably don't want to go overtime and only be sharing 2-1 points versus I can take all 3 points to myself and build a huge gap between everyone else
Yeah,
in our
it's
division.
true.
But going off of that, the other last thing off of that, besides adding physicality, which is awesome, there's a whole rule thing. I'll send it over to you. Look at, it's awesome to read. The last thing that they implemented, which I wish the NHL would bring back, but currently we just talked about goaltenders. Patrick Waugh and Martin Brodeur are the reason why, mostly Marty, the reason why this rule is in play in the NHL, and that is in the women's league, there is no trapezoid effect. And the reason
Yep.
why there is no trapezoid effect, everyone calls it the Marty effect because he is one of the greatest goaltender passers of all time. And he's the reason why that exists today. I really wish the NHL would take it back because goalies do make some of the best passes ever. I think it
Yeah.
opens stretch field, and now you just take away the advantage of a player, and which is very unfortunate. I think.
Yeah, so I think internationally they're allowed to do that.
Correct.
The Marty rule doesn't exist internationally. So I always like that in the Olympics or in the World Juniors or whatever when they can do that.
Right.
Um, Plus they're on bigger ice, so it's like it opens it up a little more. I like that this isn't involved either. I like that they can do that. Um, it really, excuse me, it really frustrates me when hockey has like divided their freaking rink up into a bunch of different little shapes. Like,
Yeah.
before you could just you had the two-line pass, right? And now it's like, oh, like you can't ice unless you're in front of the red line, or which to my opinion just creates more dumping and chasing. Because before it was like, oh, I'm gonna try and hit this guy breaking down the ice. Now it's, oh, well, that's gonna be offside, or that's gonna be a two-line pass, or that's gonna be icing, or all that stuff. And then there's the Marty rule. Oh, well, we're gonna take away the big play. That's why when there is a big play, like when a dude's coming out of, or a gal's coming out of the box, in this case, the goalie could shoot it to the person coming out of the box, and that would be such a good play. As long as they're onside and stuff. So I like that. I like the elimination of that rule. Um, I wish the NHL would do it too, because like you've seen, I think there was a goalie goal a couple weeks ago. I forget who it was, and then of course Allmark had one last year. Um, it's really exciting when goalies get involved in the offensive side of the game. You don't see it a lot in the NHL because there's a lot of incentives to freeze the puck and get a guy
Correct.
out there for a face-off or something. But I like it. Back to my point though on the standings and the points. Uh, the thing that the one downside is like to the tanking thing or to the losing thing is, if you're a team that like is bad, you could be like really bad. Whereas like now I feel like a bad team might like casually make it to overtime and get some points. But if you're like only like not winning a lot of games, and those like if you're not winning like 2 point games, and a team ahead of you is winning a bunch of 3 point games, then suddenly like you're gonna have like 10 points and the team's gonna have like 45.
Yeah.
And so it's gonna like it might stretch out the standings like too much. Because so if like you're bad, then you're like really bad. And if you're good, then you're like really good. So that could be one negative, is that it does stretch out the standings too much. Um
Correct.
like because now if you're only getting 2 points for a win, then it's kind of hard to really break away from the pack. Um but anyway, that I'm excited for the league. I think it's good. I think it honestly, Kyle, I'm biased because I like hockey more than basketball. Already, it seems sort of more legitimate than the WNBA. Uh, Not that the WNBA is illegitimate. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is like regionally, I think the communities are buying into their team, because they strategically put them in 6 cities where they knew hockey was popular. They didn't try and make it happen somewhere where it wasn't. You've got Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa. Then you have New York. Is it New York, Philly?
And I think
No,
it's New
it's
York, Minnesota.
New York, Minnesota. Yeah, New York, Minnesota, and Boston. So they strategically put it where they knew the sport was popular. Unlike, I think, the WNBA gets caught up in wherever the NBA team wants to have a secondary investment. Like,
Yeah.
does anybody care about the Connecticut Sun or whatever they are? No. And it's not their fault. It's just that they're put in a place where their primary reason for being there was because I think at one point there was a lot of casino money there. You know what I mean? Like it just wasn't really for the sport. It was for somebody's bank account. Um, Whereas I think in this instance, like the incentive was there where we're going to put it where we know there's a desire for it, not
Correct.
just where there's already existing infrastructure where we can make a quick buck. And so that's why I like it, and that's what makes me look forward to it.
Same. I mean, it's all there. I mean, Miss King bought it, took ownership of this whole organization. She's done great for tennis. She's going to do great for hockey now. So I think it's positive all the way around. Like you just said, they placed them in strategic areas for the reason why it's going to gain popularity. And I think it's going to grow over time. Give it a few years, we'll see probably another 2 teams join.
Yeah. I think you could put a team in Chicago, you could put a team in Philadelphia, you could put a team in elsewhere
Right?
in Eastern Canada, possibly Quebec City or somewhere. I think what they'll try and avoid doing is putting having it too spread out geographically because I think they want to really cut down on some of those overhead costs associated with a league this young. Um,
Yeah,
I
the
think that
only
was one of the pitfalls of some previous leagues is that there was like it wasn't centralized enough. So I think they're going to try and keep it centralized.
yeah,
Um,
makes sense.
yeah, but I like the concept, and I'm pretty happy that they chose to put those teams where they did. Uh, it would be nice though if they had like names, because that's the one thing I liked about the old league. I think it was the PHF.
Yes.
Um, is they had all these cool names and stuff, like the Metropolitan Riveters, or the Toronto Six. So maybe they'll bring that in. That would be my only other thing I would like to see. I'll give you the last word.
Oh gosh, the last word is for me is that gosh, the season's been so crazy. I don't know. I I'm just excited to see the women's league be doing so well to start, but also I feel bad that my Devils just are sucking right now. But we won't talk about those hard feelings. But the last word is
Yeah.
going to be need to go see Boston versus New York sometime this winter for the women's league.
Yeah, I'm sure you could see them in Lowell. I'm sure that would happen. That would be a lot of fun. Um, my final thought, I guess, since you brought it up, is you brought up your team. I'll bring up mine in closing. I love the Bruins. I love the way they're playing. I love that they're sort of playing like an underdog, even though they're the points leader in the conference. My one big takeaway, though, that they need to do, and I harped on this a couple months ago, they need to extend Jeremy Swayman. I will drive him to Warrior Arena with a brand new pen if Don Sweeney needs me to. But that needs to get done. It needs to happen. And last quick plug, just gonna plug this in. We don't talk about it much, but I think we should on our next episode. College hockey looks pretty dope right now. You have BU and BC are going to play each other in the Beanpot in a couple weeks, ranked number 1 and 2 in the nation. My main Black Bears are number 6 in the nation. So maybe next time in February we can talk about that. Um, but extend Jeremy Swayman, get it done. So needs to happen. So, on the topic of extensions, we will not extend this podcast any longer, but I appreciate you all tuning in. Kyle, thanks for joining me as always. We'll be back next month with another episode of Odd Man Rush. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend and enjoy your favorite hockey team. I'm Will Highland. This is Kyle Diezel. You've been listening to Odd Man Rush.